Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The first lie Tyler told wasn't with his mouth, it was with his silence. The kind of silence that wears a neat shirt, shows up with borrowed shoes, and nods at conversations it has no business belonging to. 8 months back in Brayton Cove had felt like walking through life with no pockets, nothing to offer, nowhere to hide his empty hands. And yet, every week, he would post pictures with old filters and newer captions, pretending to still be abroad, pretending the life he once dreamed of hadn't gone up in smoke like a burnt offering on an altar that never called his name. Even the pictures he posted weren't his anymore. He had mastered the art of stealing moments from strangers' timelines and dressing them with his own hashtags. But what hurt more than the lie was how easy it became to keep it going. It was like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. You learned to smile through the limp. His cousin, Declan, who housed him in a boys' quarters that smelled faintly of rust and kerosene, had long stopped asking questions. "You day come out today?" He'd ask casually, not because he cared, but because sometimes even silence needs a companion. And on days Tyler couldn't bear to look at his phone's notification bar, filled with reminders to pay bills he couldn't pronounce, he would just sit outside, watching the neighborhood kids chase a punctured football like joy was something you could still kick around without paying rent on your heart. When the reunion invite dropped in the WhatsApp group titled Brayton Said '09 Fam, Tyler laughed so hard he startled Declan, who was peeling groundnuts in the next room. "You won't go?" Declan asked, his eyes not leaving the shells in his hands. Tyler shrugged. "Dem go think say I day for 'em if I no show." The truth was, showing up scared him more than staying hidden. He imagined walking into a room full of faces that once knew his name and seeing in their eyes the question he feared the most: "What happened to you?" He paced the small room that evening like a man being haunted by his own reflection. The only mirror he owned was cracked at the corner, and even that felt like poetic justice, broken glass for a broken truth. He borrowed a checkered shirt from Declan, who was smaller but had one shirt that had escaped the war of time and faded soap. The trousers he wore had once been part of his Sunday best, now ironed until the pleats begged for retirement. His shoes had seen more birthdays than he had candles for, but after he buffed them with candle wax and spit, they looked new enough to lie again. As he stood in front of the mirror that night, the cracked glass split his face in 3 directions, one looking proud, another looking scared, and the third simply lost. And somewhere between the silence and the sigh, Tyler whispered to himself, "Nah, just one night. Blend in, say small laugh, come back." The beachfront restaurant where the reunion held was called Ocean Whispers, a name too poetic for a place that smelled faintly of grilled fish, expired perfumes, and old secrets. Tyler walked in with the kind of confidence that wasn't born. It was borrowed from memories of better times, from Facebook filters, from whatever was left of his pride. The laughter in the room was thick, sticky with nostalgia and the scent of money well spent. Keene was already holding court in the corner, flanked by 2 ex-schoolmates and a bottle of Hennessy he brought just for the boys. Lola, who once couldn't spell entrepreneur, now imported wigs and managed a staff of 15. People took turns shouting their wins across the room like athletes bragging about medals, and Tyler found himself smiling like a man holding a balloon too close to fire. Every question aimed his way felt like a needle poking at his costume. "Bro, you still day say?" "Guy, you never post your ride for like 6 months, though." "Nah, you quiet past rich people." He laughed, his eyes darting across the room for escape. "I did keep 'em low-key," he said, adding a soft chuckle that masked the tremble in his voice. Inside, his stomach was a beehive of anxiety, but his face played host to rehearsed confidence. When the waiter dropped the menu in front of him, he ordered what he couldn't afford and prayed they'd decide to split the bill evenly. It wasn't hunger that threatened him. It was exposure. The wind shifted when she walked in, like the room had inhaled a new kind of oxygen. Jasmine Iwe. Her name rolled through Tyler's memory like the soft hum of a song you forgot you loved. She wasn't wearing anything loud, just a plain mustard maxi dress, sneakers that had stories in their soles, and her hair in braids like threads of memory woven with quiet pride. No red lipstick, no diamonds, no announcements. And yet every pair of eyes found her like a magnet draws metal from dust. She smiled like someone who had finally made peace with herself and wasn't in a hurry to prove it. The host didn't need to introduce her, but he did anyway, saying, "Guys, guess who came through for us last minute?" And as she hugged a few classmates and took her seat near the middle, even the air seemed to hush itself. Tyler, from his corner, watched her, not with lust, not even with longing, but with something deeper, recognition, not of her face, but of her spirit. He remembered how she used to struggle with her speech in school, how she'd skip entire sentences just to avoid a stammer, how people talked over her like she was background noise. But now, the same voice that once trembled cut through the room like warm butter on cold yam. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke about coming back to town to start a self-esteem project for young girls, people leaned in, not out of pity, but because something in her tone made you remember what truth sounded like. Tyler didn't remember standing up, but somehow he found himself outside the restaurant, hands buried in his pockets like a man trying to hide the tremble in his fingers. The sea breeze teased the collar of his shirt, but it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was something deeper, the kind of cold that crept in when you stood too close to your own truth and realized it no longer recognized you. From where he stood, he could still hear Jasmine's voice floating through the open glass, measured, intentional, without a single crack. It wasn't what she said that hit him most. It was the ease with which she occupied her own skin. There was no performance, no polish meant to impress. She spoke like someone who had bled and healed, and now offered her scars as maps for others to follow. Tyler had once believed that silence made shame quieter, but watching Jasmine reminded him that sometimes silence is the microphone shame uses to preach louder lies. He stared at his reflection in the tinted window. Same face, same lies, same borrowed shoes. He could barely hold his own gaze. A part of him wanted to leave, to sneak away and text the group that he had to catch an early flight. But another part, a quieter, braver part, whispered, "Stay. Even if you're broken. Stay." Inside, Jasmine was still speaking, but the words had moved from introductions to something deeper. "I used to think my voice wasn't good enough," she said, pausing slightly, "until I realized the people who made me feel small were just loud. Loud doesn't mean right, and silence doesn't mean weak." Her words weren't fireworks, but they lit something in the room, a stillness, a collective reflection. People weren't clapping because she was dramatic. They were listening because she was real. Tyler leaned on the edge of the wooden railing, his mind replaying the moments he had silenced himself in fear of being seen too clearly. He remembered back in Pretoria, after the failed business venture, how he stayed indoors for 3 weeks, eating dry cereal and lying to his friends back home about being busy with client meetings. He remembered the messages he left unread, the calls he ignored, the job applications he never completed because even the thought of rejection felt like too much weight for an already sinking boat. Jasmine's voice echoed faintly through the restaurant's glass panes, but her impact felt louder than any speaker. A group of ladies near the bar shifted their chairs to listen better. Even Keem, the boastful lounge owner, had gone quiet, his drink untouched. Tyler watched them all from outside, realizing that he had spent years trying to steal applause in rooms he didn't even want to be in, while Jasmine had walked into this one and owned it without lifting a finger. Not because she was rich, not because she dressed loud, but because peace is louder than pride when you finally let it speak. He slipped back in through the side door just as the evening transitioned into the unstructured part of the reunion, food, music, and pockets of conversation forming like smoke. People stood around in groups, laughing over old jokes, some reminiscing about the science teacher who smelled like palm oil and anger. But even amidst the laughter, Tyler felt like a man swimming against a current made of memory and mirrors. He tried to blend in, laughing when others laughed, nodding at stories he barely heard, but his eyes kept drifting to where Jasmine now sat, sipping malt from a glass bottle, like a woman who had nothing to prove. She caught his gaze once and smiled, not the kind of smile that says I see you, but the kind that says I remember who you were. And somehow, that smile didn't sting. It soothed. He walked toward her slowly, the way a man might approach a dog he once chased away, hopeful, uncertain, half ready for rejection. But Jasmine didn't mock his awkwardness. She patted the empty chair beside her. "That's the point of growing, isn't it?" she replied, taking another sip. "If I stayed the same, I'd still be hiding behind I'm fine, and it's nothing." Tyler sat down, his heartbeat quickening. "I'm still hiding," he said, almost like a confession. Jasmine's gaze didn't flinch. "At least you know. Some people die buried in versions of themselves they never liked." The conversation that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a soft unraveling. Tyler told her in scattered pieces how the business trip to Pretoria was meant to last 3 weeks, but turned into an 8-month exile after his partner absconded with the funds. He admitted he didn't know how to start over when the people he left behind thought he was going to return rich. "I wanted to win so badly," he whispered, "just so nobody would think I was a waste." Jasmine listened, her eyes never leaving his face, as if she were storing every word in a glass jar marked sacred. She didn't pity him. She didn't interrupt. She simply nodded, then said, "I know that hunger, the one that makes you perform like your life is a stage play. But you'll starve doing that. The only place you get fed is where your truth can breathe." Tyler felt the heaviness in his chest loosen a little, like a door had cracked open inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just being. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the waves roll in the distance. And just when he thought the moment was over, Jasmine leaned slightly forward and whispered, "You think you've been invisible all this while, but I've been watching." "Not like a stalker," she grinned. "Like someone who knew you weren't as okay as you pretended. I just didn't know if you were ready to stop pretending." Tyler exhaled, a shaky breath that felt like it had been held for years. "I think I'm tired," he said quietly. "Good," Jasmine smiled. "Tired is where real begins." Morning crept in like an old friend tiptoeing into a room where someone had just cried through the night. Tyler lay in Declan's boys' quarters, not asleep but not fully awake either, the kind of in-between state where dreams whisper and reality waits just outside the door. The plastic ceiling fan above him made a slow, crooked circle, like it too was tired of spinning for people who had no direction. Jasmine's words replayed in his mind, not as sentences but as feeling, soft, truthful, and oddly healing. For the first time since he returned to Brayton, he didn't feel the need to defend his silence or wrap excuses around his failures. Instead, he sat up on the sponge mattress, feet planted on the cold floor tiles, and just breathed. There was no alarm to chase, no meeting to fake, no call to dodge. Just him, his truth, and the faint scent of leftover kerosene from Declan's stove. The quiet was almost sacred. He rose, not with a spring but with intention, and shuffled outside where the sky yawned into a pale blue. Declan was sweeping the compound with long strokes that kicked up fine dust. "How far last night?" he asked without looking up. Tyler hesitated, then smiled faintly. Different," he said. And it was. Something had shifted, not like a thunderstorm, but like the first crack in an egg before life begins to stir. That week, Tyler avoided his usual routine of online showboating and stayed off social media. His fingers hovered over the Instagram icon a few times, but something inside him pulled back. What was the point of posting a life he no longer wanted to pretend he lived? The urge to keep up appearances felt weaker now, like a bully whose voice had started cracking. Instead, he used the time to do something he hadn't done in months. Think without distraction. He remembered how, before things went south, he had once dreamed of running a digital brand management firm, not because it sounded fancy, but because he genuinely loved helping people craft stories that sold products without selling lies. That love, buried beneath months of shame and debt, began to twitch again like a sleeping limb slowly waking. He brought out an old notebook where he had once scribbled ideas, taglines, logo concepts, branding strategies. The pages smelled of dust and forgotten ambition. But as he flipped through them, his heart thudded not with regret, but with a strange, hopeful ache. That evening, he sat outside with Declan's cracked laptop, the screen flickering slightly at the edges, and began updating his CV. Not the kind that screamed with inflated titles and fake internships, but one that simply said, "Here I am. Here's what I've done. Here's what I'm willing to learn." Every sentence felt like stitching a part of himself back together, thread by thread, truth by truth. 2 days later, Tyler mustered the courage to message Keem. It wasn't easy. His ego barked at him the whole time, telling him it would be embarrassing, that Keem would laugh, that no one hires someone who once claimed to be doing consulting abroad. But desperation, when paired with humility, becomes a ladder. And Tyler had finally decided to climb. He typed the message simply, "Hey bro, I saw your lounge's Instagram page. Looks amazing. I've been working on digital branding and I'd love to intern with your team, no pay needed. Just want to learn and contribute." He sent it, heart pounding like the roof of a Malibu on a bumpy Lagos road. The read receipt came within minutes, followed by a voice note. Kim's tone was light, but not mocking. "Nah, you talk this one? I'll beg show tomorrow if you're free. Let's see what we fit run." Tyler stared at the screen in disbelief. Not only had Keem replied, he had offered a shot. It wasn't a job offer, but it was oxygen, and sometimes that's all a drowning man needs. He showed up the next day wearing the same borrowed shirt from the reunion, armed with a flash drive, a cheap biro, and a determination he hadn't felt in years. Keem introduced him to the social media team as "my guy from way back, Sharp Brain," and handed him access to a few campaigns. Tyler didn't brag. He just observed, listened, and asked smart questions. By the end of the day, he had taken notes on 2 brand audits and redesigned a flyer that had been stuck in draft for days. That night, he walked home with dust on his shoes, but peace in his chest. Over the next 3 weeks, Tyler began rebuilding, not just professionally, but personally. He stopped pretending to his friends, slowly revealing little truths in private messages and casual calls. The first few were awkward. Some replied with confused emojis. Others asked if he was okay. But one by one, the responses grew kinder. "Bro, you try no easy to talk like this," one wrote. Another said, "Honestly, I dare respect you more now than before." And that's when Tyler understood. People don't love you for your perfection. They love you for your humanity. He and Jasmine spoke often, not every day, but enough to feel like an anchor in the storm. She sent him resources, voice notes, even introduced him to a small community of young creatives trying to reinvent their careers. They didn't flaunt wealth. They shared mistakes, wins, doubts, and it felt like stepping into a room where no one was trying to outshine the other, just trying to stay lit. On one of those evenings, as Tyler sat under the compound mango tree, sipping sachet water and sketching branding ideas in his notebook, he smiled to himself, not because everything was perfect, but because for once, everything was honest. He was no longer trying to steal the spotlight. And yet, somehow, for the first time in forever, the light was finding him anyway. Tyler didn't realize how much of himself he had buried until the day he was asked to present a strategy at Keem's lounge team meeting. It was a Tuesday morning with sunlight too harsh for excuses, and his palms sweated like they were mourning something, perhaps the part of him that used to tremble at the idea of being seen. The projector was already blinking on the wall, casting flickers of nervous anticipation across the room, and as he walked up to the front with only a marker and a USB drive, he heard that old whisper of doubt again. What if they laugh? What if you mess it up? But this time, he didn't argue with the voice. He simply chose not to obey it. His slides weren't flashy, no spinning graphics, no overpolished fonts. Just simple visuals, honest ideas, and a story told like a man peeling back the curtain, not to boast but to show what lived behind it. He spoke about brand identity like it was a living thing, how it breathed, how it stumbled, how it needed to feel human before it could ever sell anything real. At some point, he forgot about the sweat on his palms, the borrowed belt that kept slipping, and even the fact that he had rehearsed all night by talking to the cracked mirror in Declan's hallway. What he saw instead were nods. Not pity nods, but the kind that come from people who know what it means to be truly understood. When he finished, no one clapped too loudly, but no one moved either. Keem, who had always been the loudest in the room, simply said, "Guy, that thing you talked just now makes sense, die." Later that afternoon, Tyler sat in the small staff kitchenette, holding a lukewarm bottle of water like it was a trophy. He wasn't smiling with his teeth, but with his whole being, the kind of smile that isn't loud but stays long. It was in that quiet moment that Jasmine called. She never called during the day unless it was urgent, so his heart skipped slightly as he answered. But her tone was light, like wind through bamboo. "I know you had your presentation today. How did it go?" He chuckled. "I didn't faint." She laughed, the sound warm enough to boil hope. "I wasn't worried. I knew you'd show up." He paused, phone pressed to his ear like it was a lifeline. "Funny thing is," he said slowly, "it didn't feel like I was showing up for them. It felt like I was finally showing up for me." Jasmine was quiet for a breath. Then she whispered, "That's the win, Tyler. Not the applause. Just being present in your own life again." And in that moment, something in him unlocked, a door that had once rusted shut. They didn't talk for long, but the silence after the call wasn't empty. It was sacred. He walked back to his table with a new steadiness, and though his name wasn't on any company plaque or glass door, he felt like he had finally arrived somewhere no plane ticket could ever take him. That evening, as the sun dipped like melted gold behind the Brayton skyline, Tyler decided to do something bold. He called his parents. It wasn't a dramatic reunion or a teary confession, just a quiet call that started with, "Hey, I'm sorry I haven't checked in lately," and led to a conversation that stitched the months of silence into something resembling a second chance. His father didn't say much, but his mother's voice cracked at some point, the way a river does when the dam begins to loosen its grip. "You sound lighter," she said, and Tyler smiled because she was right. He wasn't just lighter, he was freer. After the call, he sat on the stairs of the compound, watching kids chase each other with slippers in hand, their laughter skipping across the dusk like pebbles over water. Declan joined him with 2 sachets of pure water and said, "You dey smile anyhow these days, oh." Tyler grinned. "No be anyhow. Nah, the first real smile way I get waist shame, no follow drag chair, sit down." They laughed, and for a moment the air between them held more than dust. It held grace. That night Tyler slept without dreams, because for the first time in months he didn't need to imagine a better life. He was building one slow, honest brick at a time. 2 weekends later, Jasmine invited him to speak at a small youth gathering she was hosting in town. Nothing big, she'd said. Just a few young people trying to find their way. Tyler almost said no. The idea of standing in front of people again, this time not as an expert, but as a witness to his own rebirth, made his chest tighten. But Jasmine added, "Just speak from where it hurts." That's where healing begins. So he went. The venue was a modest hall with plastic chairs, a whiteboard, and a wall fan that made more noise than wind. The audience was young, college kids, fresh graduates, some still wearing wide-eyed dreams like freshly ironed shirts. When Tyler stood to speak, he didn't carry notes. He carried memory. And memory doesn't need cue cards. He told them about the lie that nearly swallowed him, the fear of being seen as weak, the shame that kept him in silence, and the woman who reminded him that truth doesn't beg for applause, it just waits to be lived. As he spoke, the room didn't erupt. It leaned in. Some nodded. Some took notes. Some simply held their chins, eyes blinking like they were seeing their own pain in his story. When he finished, one young girl raised her hand and asked, "So what if you're still in the middle of your mess? What if your truth still smells like failure?" Tyler didn't pause. He smiled gently and said, "Then that's where your power begins. Because if you can still show up covered in dirt, it means you've stopped hiding from the ground." The days began to wear a gentler face after the youth gathering, as if life had finally stopped barking orders and started asking questions. Tyler found himself waking earlier, not because an alarm chased him out of bed, but because his thoughts were no longer heavy enough to pin him down. Morning felt like a second chance, wrapped in dew and the distant chatter of hawkers preparing for another dance with survival. Every now and then, Jasmine would send him short messages, sometimes a quote, sometimes a random picture of her coffee mug beside a Bible verse, written in her own handwriting. He kept those messages like tiny breadcrumbs on his path, reminders that healing doesn't always shout, it often whispers. One Saturday afternoon, while updating a brand proposal from Keem's Lounge, he received a text that simply read, "You're stronger than your story. Don't forget that." He stared at it for a while before responding, "I used to think my story was my weakness." Jasmine replied almost instantly, "It's the crack that lets the light in. Keep writing it." He saved that thread. Not in the cloud. In his chest. There was something about her calm that disarmed the loudness in his past, like a river washing over the footprints of someone who had once run too far, too fast, without knowing where they were headed. One Wednesday evening, as the town began winding down like a tired radio, Jasmine called with a smile in her voice. "Remember that reunion night?" she asked, and Tyler laughed. "Like I could forget." She paused, then added, "Well, there's another meetup coming. Not the old one. This time, it's a joint event. Alumni from Brayton and 2 neighboring schools. You should come. People are asking after you now." Tyler leaned back on the plastic chair in Declan's kitchen, the light bulb above him flickering like it was uncertain whether to give up or shine one last time. "As what?" he asked, half joking, half serious. "As you," Jasmine said. "Just you. No mask. No script." He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of habit. There was still a part of him that remembered the way Judgment wore cologne and grinned with too many teeth. But the larger part of him, wiser now, bolder, nodded before his lips even moved. "All right," he said. "But don't expect any dancing." She laughed. "Tyler, if you just walk in and sit down, you've already done enough." When he ended the call, the silence in the room didn't return as a threat. It returned as a friend. He stood up, washed a single plate in the sink, and made a mental note. This time, he would show up not to blend in, but to simply be. The night of the event arrived with more ease than he expected. Tyler wore a plain black shirt, clean jeans, and his favorite second-hand sneakers, the ones he had stitched himself after the Soul tried to retire. There was no perfume masking fear, no forced bravado in his stride. He entered the hall like someone who wasn't seeking validation, but simply honoring an invitation. The lights were warm, not harsh, and laughter danced across the space like butterflies at a naming ceremony. People noticed him, but this time they didn't look past him, they looked into him. "Tyler," someone called, waving from across the room. It was Anita, one of the old classmates who used to skip science class and always carry chin-chin in her bag. She hugged him like he was a returning brother. "You killed that talk at Jasmine's event, oh," she whispered. "I played it for my younger brother." He cried. Tyler smiled, heart swelling not with pride, but with quiet gratitude. Jasmine appeared moments later, dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her hair in a low puff, eyes glowing like someone who had learned to carry her joy with both hands. She didn't run up to him. She didn't need to. Their eyes met, and in that meeting was every conversation they'd ever had. She pointed to an empty seat beside her. He walked over, and as he sat, someone from the other table whispered loud enough to be heard, "That's him. That's the guy who said your truth can breathe even in failure." Tyler didn't flinch. He just nodded. And the world didn't collapse. It exhaled. The evening unfolded with soft music, shared memories, and spontaneous moments of vulnerability. People spoke not as curators of perfect timelines, but as survivors of real life. Jasmine was asked to give a brief talk, and this time she pulled Tyler up with her. He shook his head at first, hands raised like a suspect, but she smiled that knowing smile and whispered, "Let them see what grace looks like when it finds a home." They stood together before the modest crowd, and Jasmine told the story of a man who once carried his shame like a backpack filled with bricks, afraid to set it down because he thought the world would laugh at his scars. Tyler picked up from there, sharing how the lie he lived was heavier than the truth he ran from. He told them how he once believed that failure was a final destination, not knowing it was just a road bump trying to teach direction. By the time they ended, the room was quiet, not the kind of silence that comes with awkwardness, but the sacred kind that follows clarity. A girl in the front row stood up and clapped, then another, and another. But Tyler didn't hear applause. He heard freedom. That night, as they stepped out under the moonlight, Jasmine turned to him and said, "You didn't just speak. You owned the room." Tyler looked up at the sky, then back at her, his voice steady. "You walked in and stole the show. I just followed your courage." She smiled. "Nah, you walked in as yourself. That was the show." Somewhere between mid-morning and a half-finished breakfast of dry bread and black tea, Tyler received the email that felt like a quiet drum roll in his chest. It was from a small but fast-rising creative agency in UEO. He had applied for a remote content strategy role 2 weeks prior after Jasmine forwarded the link to him, captioned simply, "You're ready for this." He hadn't expected much. After years of ghosting opportunities and hiding behind polite lies, he knew how rejection dressed, always in brief formalities and polite declines. But this one wasn't a no. It wasn't even a maybe. It was a welcome. "We're excited to have you join our team as a part-time strategist," it read. No fancy embellishments, just clarity, like the kind of light that enters a room without knocking. Tyler didn't shout or leap. He just closed the laptop slowly and stared ahead, blinking as if his eyes couldn't believe what his spirit already knew. He rose from the wooden bench, walked out into the open compound, and let the sun soak his face like a long overdue baptism. Declan spotted him from the window and called out, "You dey smile like person way win contract." Tyler didn't explain. He didn't need to. Some joys aren't meant to be dissected. They're meant to be lived, quietly, like a prayer whispered in one's native tongue. That afternoon, he walked to the printing shop and laminated the acceptance letter, not because he was afraid it'd vanish, but because he wanted to touch it whenever his doubts came knocking again. The new role gave Tyler more than an income. It gave him rhythm, structure, purpose. His mornings now had intention, his evenings held reflection, and his nights carried rest, not just sleep, but genuine rest, the kind that wraps itself around your bones and tells your heartbeat, "You are safe now." He set up a simple desk in the corner of the boys' quarters, next to the window where the breeze carried the scent of roasting corn from the neighbor's stall. Jasmine had gifted him a second-hand chair from her office, a sturdy one with a slightly faded blue cushion, and each time he sat in it, it felt like leaning into her faith in him. They didn't see each other every day, but their conversations flowed like two rivers that understood the value of taking their time. Sometimes she sent him new books, other times they exchanged voice notes about clients, deadlines, and the strange way people undervalue silence. One night, during one of their usual calls, Jasmine said, "Funny how we both had to fail publicly to find what was private and true." Tyler nodded even though she couldn't see him. "We unlearned shame," he said. That's the real graduation. The line went quiet for a beat. Then Jasmine whispered, "Proud of you, T." He smiled and replied, "I'm proud of the me you helped uncover." It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something deeper, respect that had weathered the storm and bloomed into a safe harbor. A few months later, Brayton's local radio station invited Jasmine to share on their Sunday evening segment titled Roots and Roads. She was hesitant at first. Her voice had grown in reach, and attention was no longer foreign, but she didn't want to become a brand. She wanted to remain a bridge. Still, after some nudging, she agreed. And on the day of the recording, she asked Tyler to come with her, not as an assistant, not as a guest, but as her anchor. "Just sit across me in the studio," she said. "Your presence grounds me." Tyler agreed, unsure of what grounding someone truly meant, but knowing he'd go anywhere she asked, even into silence. The studio smelled of old wires and new ideas. The host was polite but curious. "So, Jasmine, what's the real story behind your rise?" She smiled. "There is no rise," she said calmly. "Just a return. A return to the version of myself I buried under performance." The host nodded, clearly moved. And then Jasmine turned toward Tyler, who wasn't even supposed to speak, and said, "This man beside me, he's proof that restoration isn't loud. It walks in quietly and rebuilds what shame tried to tear apart." The host looked surprised. "Would you like to say something, Mr. Tyler?" Tyler cleared his throat, eyes steady. "I once lived in fear of being seen without polish. I thought people loved the illusion. But she showed me the truth, even when cracked, is stronger than the prettiest lie. And now I tell stories that don't need filters. Because if people don't love you with your scars, they're not meant to clap for your shine." The mic was still on, but the room went silent, not for lack of words, but in awe what was just said. The weeks that followed were nothing spectacular. There were no viral interviews or brand deals knocking on their doors. But life, in its quiet unfolding, began to bloom differently. Tyler now had 3 steady clients. He wasn't rich, but his fridge had food. His data lasted longer than a week, and he no longer paused before answering unknown numbers. He had cleared most of his debts, not just the financial ones, but the emotional kind too. He spoke with his parents weekly, sent airtime to his younger cousin without feeling pressured, and sometimes bought small gifts for Declan, who never asked for much but always gave with a full hand. Jasmine continued mentoring young girls and was slowly building a network for women returning from broken dreams. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, they both sat at a modest cafe under a faded umbrella, sipping Zobo from recycled glass cups. Tyler looked at her and said, "You stole the show that night." Jasmine smiled. "No," she replied. "You just stopped pretending." And when a man shows up as himself, the world listens differently. Tyler leaned back, hands behind his head, and laughed, the kind of laughter that doesn't come from the throat, but from the soul. And as the sun slipped behind the buildings, and the wind carried the sound of children playing in the distance, the two of them sat there, unrushed, unmasked, unbroken, proof that sometimes the quietest victories are the loudest triumphs. There are seasons in life when pretending feels safer than admitting we're hurting, when silence becomes our mask and shame becomes our shadow. We lie not to deceive others, but to protect the little dignity we feel we have left. But the truth is, carrying shame in secret only adds more weight to a heart already weary. Like Tyler, some of you listening may be hiding behind borrowed smiles, carefully edited lives, and muted cries. But hear this, healing begins the moment you choose honesty over illusion. You don't need to have it all figured out before you show up. You just need the courage to walk in your truth, even if your voice shakes and your shoes are dusty. Let people see your scars. Let them witness your becoming. Because the ones who truly love you don't need you polished. They just need you present. Don't measure your worth by who claps for you when you pretend. Measure it by who stays when you're real. And if you ever find someone like Jasmine, a voice that calms your chaos, a presence that reminds you you're not broken beyond repair. Don't run. Don't shrink. Stand beside them. Listen. Heal. Grow. Then pay it forward by doing the same for someone else. You don't have to steal the show. Sometimes just being yourself is the most unforgettable entrance. Heavenly Father, thank you for the quiet moments that reveal loud truths. Thank you for reminding us that we are not defined by our failures, our delays, or the opinions of those who never knew our journey. We come before you today not dressed in perfection, but clothed in need. Need for strength, need for healing, need for courage. For every listener who has been pretending out of fear, Lord, lift that burden off their chest. Replace shame with peace. Replace fear with boldness. And where they've hidden behind silence, give them the words to speak life again. Father, restore the dreams that shame buried. Restore the relationships that distance bruised. And for those walking through quiet storms, send them voices like Jasmine, gentle, firm, and healing. Remind them they are not alone. Remind them that the truth, no matter how fragile, always leads home. We pray for open doors, not just of opportunity, but of understanding and grace. Teach us to love ourselves even when life hasn't clapped for us yet. Teach us to forgive the versions of ourselves that tried, fell, and feared rising again. And when we stand before people, Lord, let it not be to perform, but to testify. Because you don't anoint perfection, you anoint the willing. Let the light of truth burn brighter than the illusion of image. Let our lives speak louder than our captions. And let our scars become signatures of your mercy. We declare we are rising. We are enough. We are not behind. And because you are with us, we will walk into rooms we once hid from, and they will know we came not to impress, but to live free. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.